The second tab, called Report, will feature an ebook-like reading experience for the customer with cross-references to code and other artifacts. To allow for a convenient writing experience for the reviewer, we would like to allow engaging blocks with a click and disengaging them with a click outside, while the permissions of a regular customer only allow reading them. How do we cater for that? Well, the previewable Markdown area component already knows how to toggle between editing and non-editing states by providing a form or not. So our job is to provide another flag to decide whether to pass a form to our component or not, and we can do this with Kredis. We bundle add Kredis and run its install task, which simply provides a default Redis configuration. Let's restart Puma to reflect the changes. In our content element model, we just add a Kredis flag to determine whether this specific block is being edited or not. We will provide for a more concurrency allowing way later. So in order to toggle our content block between editing and non-editing states, we need to connect our injecting the form into the component to this flag. If we check back in our browser, the blocks are now not showing the text area anymore because the Kredis flag for each of those is false by default. To achieve the toggling of the editing state, we pull in StimulusReflex. Let's generate an inline edit reflex with an enable and disable action. Let's check it out. First, we'll write a helper method to access the block in question from a signed global ID stored in an SGID attribute on the element's dataset. The enable and disable methods just serve as proxies to toggle the Kredis flag. Now let's patch up our markup to make this work. We will provide a data SGID attribute on the turbo frame with the content elements or comments signed ID. On the preview panel, we put a data reflex attribute to invoke our enable action and constrain this to the case when our view component is not already in editing state. By specifying the data reflex dataset to include all ancestors, we make sure that our data SGID actually is included in the dataset. In the browser, clicking on a block, it switches to editing mode. Hooray! Viewing it as the customer, he or she still isn't allowed to edit. Good. To disable editing, we will need to do a bit more work. First, we connect our enclosing turbo frame to the inline edit stimulus controller. On focus out, we trigger the disable action. To understand the mechanics of the focus out event, we need to take a look at its related target property. In the context of a focus event, it has different meanings. Either the element receiving or losing focus. In the case of focus out, it's the target receiving focus. Why is that important? Because we only want to trigger the disable action when we click outside the block. To make sure that this is the case, inside the inline edit stimulus controller, whenever we invoke the disable action, we make sure there is a related target and the element the stimulus controller is connected to does not contain it. Only then do we stimulate the reflex, hence this little detour into JavaScript land. There's one final tweak we need to do here. To make the focus out work, we need to make the related target actually focusable. To achieve that, we just set a tab index equals -1 on the enclosing container. Okay, so far so good. Remember that before I talked about making our Kredis attribute more multi-user resilient? That's why we will change it from a simple flag to a set containing users' global IDs. Here's a helpful method to check if a certain user is currently included in this set. In other words, she is currently editing the record. In the reflex, instead of toggling the flag, we either append the current user's global ID to this set or remove it. And that's it. Now an element can be toggled by multiple users individually. Whether that is actually a good idea and would rather lock the record for editing is a topic for another video.